So today in Ezekiel, we're reading probably the most iconic part of Ezekiel's journey as a prophet, the Valley of the Dry Bones. Now, this vision is probably what most people know Ezekiel for. And if I'm being completely honest, me too, because some of the things on the sign acts that I've read in this book, I didn't know that, Ezekiel did them, or I knew Ezekiel as the Ezekiel of the Valley of the Dry Bones. So, which is why I know how important it is to actually read the Bible cover to cover, because sometimes there are just things about people that you miss. So yes, that's his most important thing, but we've seen him do even more amazing things and perform more sign acts than probably any prophet so far, if we look at it very critically. So, I have heard sermons preached about the Valley of Dry Bones in different contexts. I've even prayed prayers, of resurrection of dead things. But today I got an opportunity to read it in the proper context. Now, from what we know, or what I know, since I'm the one who's sharing my lessons, is that the valley represented Israel and Judah, a land that had been destroyed, the people had been dead and all, and God was saying that he would give them new life and bring them back to their land. Now, I saw some similarities between the dry bones and the original creation of man. So in the original creation, God made man from dust and breathed his life into them. And in fact, the same Hebrew word for breath is used in both the creation, God's creation of man, and this resurrection of the dry bones. And it is the word ruach Elohim, the breath of God, which also translates to spirit. Now, God breathed his spirit back into the dry bones and gave them life the way he breathed life into man to make him man. So this is definitely like God's. I know it's probably much deeper, and I actually did some research about the whole prophecy, and it's quite interesting, the different takes from different theologians. All I know is that it's really significant, and it all points to God being the giver of life. Now, when we moved on from that, we saw Ezekiel perform another sign act where the king, where God told him to get a stick and write the name. So at the time, the kingdom of Judah and Israel, the northern and the southern kingdom, had been divided for over 350 years at this time. And the sign God commanded Ezekiel to do with the sticks written with the names of the two kingdoms and joining them back together foretold of the unity of Israel, that they will come together and they will now be under one king. Now remember that this is a dispensation. Now that they've gone into exile, we've done away with all the kings, both the evil, the good, the mixed kings of both kingdoms. Now the king that they are looking forward to now is the Messiah, which is Jesus. And then we come to a very interesting part, the prophecy of Gog and Magog. Now, the king Gog and Magog, from what I understand, are symbolisms of the kings and the nations that have opposed God's people throughout. So Gog is an archetype of God's enemies, and the prophecy seems to indicate that it is a prophecy of the end times as well. Remember when I spoke a few days ago and talked about how sometimes the prophecy is not just one thing, it's not just one dimensional, it's speaking of other things. Because as I read it, I was reminded of the same, because when you get to Revelation, or if you've ever read Revelation before, you'd know that you hear of Gog and Magog then as well. So the prophecy at this time spoke of a time when Israel would be living in peace, God's people will be peaceful, but then it will be disrupted by an attack by Gog and other nations. But the attack would arouse God's anger, and a great earthquake, fire, and pestilence, and mass confusion would fall upon Gog's people. And remember that mass confusion actually reminded me of the time of Gideon, when the Assyrians started to fight and kill themselves. Same thing is going to happen in this instance. And the aim of this is for God to show himself as God to the nations, and so they will know him for his holiness and for his greatness. Now, God promised fire on Magog, the land of Gog, and destruction of his people. And Gog himself will be burned in Israel. And their weapons, the weapons that they use or use to come against them, will be used for fuel for 7 days. And it will keep on burning for 7 years. I'm sorry, not days. So this prophecy, like I said, also shows up in Revelation 20. Which makes me inclined to believe that it's speaking of a time that will come. Now, I did some research about this, and it's very interesting that you see that some theologians already even have a theory of what Gog represents in today's nation, and they are able to, so they tie it into Russia. They say Gog is Russia. And so I read scenarios of how they have put things into context on how Russia and other countries and other nations will come against Israel and how it will end. And it actually is quite interesting. And the fire here was referring to some nuclear, like nuclear warfare, which we know that, goes on or is going on under the shadow. So, I mean, it's interesting to see. I'm here and I'm smiling and I'm talking about it, but then obviously it's going to be a terrible time if it's anything like, what is described in Revelations 20. But the fact is that I can smile because I know that at the end of the day, there is restoration. God is in it in all things. So let me not get ahead of myself too much in this and just share my lessons today. So my lesson today is a song that's been playing in a loop in my head for like a couple of weeks now. And it is that God takes what the enemy means for evil and he turns it around for good. In chapter 36, God defeats Gog and his armies before they even get to attack his people. And then he takes their weapons and gives it to the people for fuel, and the spoils of war are given to them in a battle that they didn't have to fight. That's just the kind of God that we serve. An awesome, amazing God. God's people can always be sure to enjoy undeserved generosity and unmerited favor, because that's just how he is. He is so good and there is no one like him. So in spite of everything that you think that you may be going through or whatever battles that are coming against you, God will take what the enemy means for evil and turn it around for your good. Thank you for joining me today, and we're slowly and steadily going through the book of Ezekiel. I can't wait to share my lessons here with you tomorrow, God willing. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day. God bless you.